Hello and welcome to the Future of Banking Live, the business banking panel for Europe. I'd like to welcome the panel, and I'd also like to welcome the viewers who are dialing in. Just like to talk a little bit about the objective of the panel, because it's often said that the small business banking sector is the backbone of every economy, and yet for so long it's been so underserved. And it's pretty clear now that this space is ripe for disruption. The pandemic itself has crudely highlighted vulnerabilities in this space. It's so hard running a business in normal times, let alone in a pandemic. So that ability to survive, let alone thrive, is becoming more and more urgent. It's also clear that the traditional banking models and the current business banking models we're seeing just aren't working. So we at Temenos, we see a lot of opportunities to fix this and a huge amount of opportunities for fintechs to come in and start disrupting. So there is no shortage of opportunity to disrupt. And where there's disruption, there's challenges. And today we have 4 very exciting, fearless and dynamic challenges here with us to discuss how each of them are bringing their unique touch of magic to this small business banking space. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Matteo Concas, the co-founder of Penta, focusing around Italy and Germany, and actually the youngest fintech on this panel today, so the baby of the bunch at 2 years old. We've got Philip Pullman from Conto, country manager for Germany, focusing on France also, one of the fastest growing fintechs in France. We have Oliver Prill, CEO of Tide in the UK, with upwards of 150,000 customers at this point. And at 5 years old, you're practically a grown-up amongst this group. So one of the oldest fintechs in this panel. And then last but not least, we have Edward Panteli from Anna Money, absolutely no nonsense admin, love it. Also focusing on the UK, also pretty young at around 3 years old with 2 years of going live. So welcome all of you to the panel. I'd love to start off with understanding why you're all in this space. What's your driving why for actually being in this space? So perhaps Matteo, you could start off, being the youngest of the bunch, we'll start you off first. What's your driver for moving into the small business banking space in Italy and Europe per se?
Yes, so you already explored a bit the need of the clients, or the backbone of the economy in the different countries in Europe, and especially also in Italy and Germany, which I know very well, as I was before Penta general manager Italy and head of growth Europe at N26, where we were serving only retail people, right? So I really saw the need from those customers that were giving us feedback saying, please open as well one no hassle type of bank account, very digital, transparent, that understands me. And this understanding me, which is something that traditional banks didn't really grasp, is that I can be very close to the client, just like we are doing it right now, right? So it can be via video call, can be via chat. So really creating the community, talking to them, listening to them, sending surveys, and growing the overall services, the type of app you are offering to the customers, because you talk to them. And that closeness, it's what they perceive, they are listening to me. And this is in a nutshell what also gave me the strength and the energy to then leave N26 and start this nice journey.
Great, I love that. I love that, the whole kind of understand me, because we hear that quite often. Phil, interested to know at Conto, what's your driver?
Yes, so thanks for having me. I think it's a little bit similar to what Matteo pointed out. I started this journey at Conto to focus primarily on Germany, and within Germany, I think there's a huge pain for SMEs, as pointed out, and kind of finding banking solutions, and also beyond banking solutions, that SMEs can use to do their everyday banking and business finance management. And so there's a very mature market environment in terms of banking and even in terms of fintech solutions. So there's many providers, but at the moment there's no clear, so they solve part of the problem, but there's no clear leader that solves, let's say that solves all of the problems, or can address all of the problems, and creates this sort of next level solution for the SME. And so with Konto, I think we're trying to be very human-centric, very customer-centric, and listen to the SME, and really understanding what are the core drivers of their business, and how can we as Konto, how can we address that?
Yeah, that's great. Again, I love that human-centric approach. And in a second, as we do this, we'll move to what that next level solution might look like. Oliver, what instigated Tide?
Yeah, so the founding team, of which I wasn't one, but I completely share their view, was they actually didn't start as bankers. They actually started with the problems they were facing as entrepreneurs. So where their bank, they found it hard to open a bank account. It took forever. Their bank account wouldn't fit with all their other, admin solutions, etc. And so they came up with a mission that, by the way, sounds very similar to what we've discussed here, which is really about what we say. So it's about saving people time and, in brackets, money. So for small business owners, the main thing that motivates them, and I think very consistent with what we've heard, is really they want to get on with running their business, right? And they, to the extent that they want to have some spare time, and running their business for them is, making their restaurant thrive, their marketing agency thrive. It's not about, doing their banking and related admin. And so this is where we've set out. We set out to save people time, and we're relentlessly solving around that as a platform. I'm sure we're going to come to that, in a moment. And the need is phenomenal. So you talk about 150,000 members. We now have got 175,000 members. So the growth.
Wow! Congratulations.
And it's driven by, I think, as Matteo was saying, that there is a real need out there for a different solution. I mean, we'll come to the business model in a moment, but we actually even challenge it whether it should be called business banking. We use it as short form, but it's really, as everyone else has said here, it's about banking and admin. And there's unfortunately that sort of says internally, by the way, we use the operating system. But that's what we really try to solve for. So we look at it very, very differently to a traditional player, and I think we concur, right? It's really about saving time and money for these SMEs.
Yeah, so less about just being the funding partner or sort of being the funding supplier, which traditionally banks are seen as, more going beyond the funding and beyond the lending into actually becoming that partner who helps them run their business.
Yeah, and this is actually, by the way, one of the really interesting ones that we can go into. SMEs are very heterogeneous. So, we have a lot of, a lot of debate with government around lending. And one of the things I always say when I go to any of these meetings, they say, well, how can we lend to 100% of SMEs? And I say, never. They say, why? I said, 1/3 of SMEs are extremely cash rich. They will never borrow, right? They don't even want it, right? So this is one of the things we have to learn about the sector, is that it's very, very heterogeneous with very different priorities, which is, by the way, when we later on talk about business models, also I think a reason why there will not be one model fits all. There will actually be a diversity of business models. We actually think well.
Perfect. I'll pause you there because I think it'll be really interesting to move into the propositions in a second. But Edouard, I'd love to hear from you. What triggered the arrival of Anna?
Well, that's a question that there's a lot of answer to, but primarily the driving force was that we have set up and launched a digital bank in Russia, which is called Tochka, and it's a big operation now, over 200 active users, and profitable, 20 million euro in pre-tax profit. So it's a sizable operation, but we we wanted to do it abroad. It's like, I used to be a climber, and if you ask some person, why would you like to climb 7B? there's no logical answer to that, no kind of rational answer to that, because you feel you can and you feel you want. And that's probably the honest answer to that. But if you talk about the business model and, you know, why this, 30% of small business owners actually spend, 30% small business owners spend 30% of their time on business admin. And that includes invoicing, that includes chasing invoices, reconciliation with payments, tax administration, filings, all that kind of, you know, admin. And, you know, payments, an essential part of it, and very much related to, you know, taxes, invoices, etc. So it's all kind of same data, more or less. And what we want to create, hopefully, is a business and finance assistant, you know, kind of helping small businesses with these business admin tasks, making it simpler, more enjoyable to the extent they can be, and, you know, spending less time on those. So that's kind of what we try to develop. And that's in between banking, accounting, tax, invoicing. It's kind of a category which doesn't exist, but hopefully will in some foreseeable future. I think it's going to take about 2 years, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to find a name to sell to the clients. So that's why what Oliver was saying as well, let's call it business banking, but then slowly we will add more features, but the clients, you need to find something to hook him first.
Yeah,
but
something to attach to.
Yeah, but I think, Matteo, that's also closely to what we do frame as beyond banking, because there is a lot of discussion around that.
Yes.
So all of you have talked about what drove you to move into this space as being predominantly beyond banking, and that's actually really interesting. It's a really nice segue to understand how are you solving that problem? What's unique about your proposition? I mean, in many ways, the small business market is looking like it might become as saturated as the retail market did with the arrival of so many fintechs and also banks spinning off, greenfield banks and spin-off banks. What is it about your proposition that you think is uniquely solving the problem of time, as you all say, the amount of time being spent on admin? You know, Edward, that 30% figure is astonishing. That, you know, that's, you know, almost a third of your week just going on not actually growing your business. So it'd be really interesting to hear from you as to what beyond banking looks like for you and whether it even is banking. It's really interesting that a lot of the time now the word bank is being misconstrued as just an organization that delivers funding. And yet what you're talking about is way more than that. It's actually becoming the partner, becoming the assistant, as you say, Edward. So it'd be really interesting to hear what your propositions are, and if you can draw out what is unique about your proposition as well, that would be great. Edward, would you like to kick off this time?
Well, most of what we talk now is more like a promise, as a way to go, right? So it's not something that you and, you know, despite all these talks about, you know, bank disruptions and, you know, digital banks, you know, and even the fatigue of, you know, bank disruption talks, but there's no clear example yet which can say, well, we got there. Still, you know, all the panelists, etc., we all collectively are small compared to, you know, to the market. So there's a lot to go. And so it's
so maybe aspirationally, what might your promise look like?
Well, there are two things that we're trying to do. One is that we're trying to go into areas which are very much related to tax administration, calculation, accounting, etc., and, you know, all the way to filings. And this is a very new kind of approach, which is very different from traditional accounting companies. Like, you know, traditional, you know, accounting software, which is actually, in essence, it's a general ledger, which, you know, which generates profit and loss and balance sheet. it's a tool to actually construe and then calculate the tax filings, right? So is there another way to do that? So that's what we're trying to kind of achieve, and integrate that into the payment flow more organically, so that the customer does not need to go through all these integrations, set it up, the complexity of those, so that this is something which happens automatically, so that you don't even
so really creating it's really about taking that one pain point, which is about the tax administration and tax filings, and integrating that into the banking proposition and making it seamless.
Yes, and so that it's beneath the hood, so that you don't see that. I mean, that's one area which we are kind of trying to develop, and technologically, and from a marketing perspective, it's not an easy one. So that this is something that needs to be built. We are on the road there. The other one is developing that as a interface you can talk to, so that you use your natural language to communicate with the app. And this is what we call hybrid intelligence, something that basically enables you to communicate as with an assistant, rather than pulling certain interfaces and functions because of the complexity of the offering.
So you're really exploring the conversational interface rather than traditional mobile or desktop.
Yes, these are the two areas where we
really
totally invest into.
Thank you for sharing that. Philip, what's your proposition doing?
Focusing a little bit on right now. So looking at what Conto does at the moment, and I think what we do quite uniquely is combining design and best-in-class user experience with modern technology. So if I'm not looking at more the aspirational level, but what is very unique right now about Conto, I would say that we have experienced that what businesses need is obviously a stable product, and a product that works for them in order to do all those great things, and in order to also move beyond the everyday banking. I think the first challenge is to really understand that everyday banking. And so we saw that it's good to drive a balanced approach between having different integration layers and connecting to third parties, but also building on our own banking infrastructure. So we built our own core banking system in 2019, and we're kind of building on that to become a fully licensed bank, to then in the next step kind of go beyond the traditional banking and offer the services that we hope will save time and money for SMEs.
Excellent. That's great. Matteo, beyond banking, what does that look like for you?
Yes, and I think we really embraced these beyond banking, because if you look at our tech team, at the end of the day, they're really focusing on the expense management part, which is not per se banking, and the integration with accounting tools. And in Germany, it's particularly cumbersome as well, especially with some leading players. And we have the banking actually done by our partner bank, which is Solaris Bank. And so it's really creating also with them great processes that we have improved over time so much, so that we can be even leaner or more efficient. This is something that, let's take the Revolut of this world or the N26, why they are so efficient in certain ways is that it's not just, and I want to say that because many people will always talk about what the customer sees and their features, but for the business model to really work as well, it's these technologies, automation that you have inside yourself that make you much quicker, spending less compared to traditional banks in managing all these services. And then you need to be able as well to personalize it, adding your own things like the accounting integration, and everyone adds his own things, or you integrate with others. But it's really the back office part, which is, I see it internally, it's who really does a lot of work that never gets always this right attention, in my opinion, but they really find a way to use the least resources possible, but to still deliver an even better experience. And we can see it when, if I look at the NPS of every one of us in this panel, it's always 3-4 times higher than the competitor of their in their own home countries, right? So use less resources for a better experience. And that's really how I see it for the next 5-10 years as well. That's going to be the advantage of all of us, challenger banks.
Yeah, I love that. So it's more about, less about the actual propositions and the functions and features, more about the experience.
Which
and
is
how technology drives that experience.
And that experience is linked on how you do it internally. Of course, it's important, the features outside, but I just wanted to point out, because Philip also explained many of those, it's another side that we are all doing, but sometimes it just gets less recognition, in my opinion, in the media or in these panels.
That's a very good point.
And which is actually the advantage of what the banks don't have, or they're trying to achieve at a certain point.
Interesting. Oliver, what would you say is your sort of beyond banking initiatives? What's unique to what Tide is trying to do?
So, you know, the problem statement is very similar, and therefore, you know, the solutions, I think, vary in nuance, but, you know, are broadly the same. So the key thing to solve is how to make all this admin and banking work seamlessly, right? That's essentially, we have a term for that internally, which we call connectivity chains. And because we've realized that a lot of these things, I think Edward was still talking about the accounting, they're integrally linked. And if you look back of why we dislike the word banking, but, you know, why traditional banks fail in this is they say, you know, I do the current account, someone else does the accounting, and here's some clunky process of how to integrate. In reality, if you're a business owner, you know, you have your invoice, you want to write your invoice, you may want to factor your invoice, you want to see your open invoices, you want to chase your invoices. You then, you know, when the money comes in, you want to attach the invoice to it, and you want to push that to the accounting system, you want to get the, you know, the VAT properly, you know, accounted for, etc. So, you know, from a business owner, and it's very different to many consumer propositions, is really a lot of these things, your workflows cut a lot across a lot of products, traditionally a bank would consider products. And therefore our focus has been really, that's what we call ourselves a platform. We actually try to avoid deep manufacturing of product. And deep manufacturing product for us, for example, is we chose not to build our own bank account. We do that with ClearBank, which essentially is a white labeled account. We are open architecture by allowing other third-party accounting solutions coming into it, because we realize this is, in our interpretation, less about the manufacturing of the product. It's what Matteo uses the word experience. We would have called, you know, internally, maybe we're too technical, we call it, you know, connectivity chain. So it's basically around making the whole thing work very, very seamlessly and smoothly. We think in the end, that's where you get, you know, you get this time saving. And we actually go out and we actually measure how much time is saved by each feature, right, in this connectivity chain, just to discipline ourselves around it. So we're relentlessly on that. So it's really around what Tide, you know, the twist we have to it is we focus as a platform, not on deep manufacturing of product, but to make everything work seamlessly across connectivity chains. And we literally take each connectivity chain and we, you know, work away at it until it works very, very smoothly.
That's I love the concept of connectivity chains. And it's interesting that almost all of you are focusing on the technology, the integration, the creating that seamless experience. And it seems to me that you have a deep understanding of the time, particularly the time pain of what SMEs are having to deal with. Yeah, what challenges are you? Go ahead, Oliver.
Let me allow to build on this, because I think one of the interesting things about this panel is that you all got people that got the message, right? So these are all effectively specialists in small business banking. One of the things that we've actually noticed that is very, you know, an interesting debate in the industry is, you know, there are players that choose a different approach, where you say, I do multi-segment, I do consumer, I do small business, I do corporate, etc. If you want a digital universal banking approach, and actually where we've seen those players are for us the ones that will find it, I think, very hard in the future, because as we all continue, the Matteos, the Edwards, and so on, the Philips of this world, right, will continue to solve the connectivity chains. That's effectively when you get the thing. Just have my daughter bringing me a coffee. Isn't that great service?
It's okay. That's a lovely service to have.
Right, taking care of that. Right? So I think that this is the interesting thing, that you have a set of specialist players here that all got the message, whether we call it, I think under the hood as Edward, or, experience as Matteo. Philip, you called it just beyond the banking. But I think it's all the same thing. We realize that business owners don't just want a business account. They want the whole thing to work, to save them time in an integrated way. And I think that's, in the end, I think where, successful plays will emerge. By the way, just to, then I'll stop off, where we decided because we always talk about SMEs, we decided where this becomes less pertinent is once small businesses or mid-sized businesses have a specialized finance function. So once you have a specialized finance function, effectively the opportunity cost isn't that big. That's why if we, for example, have said is, while we would never stop a mid-sized business or a corporate becoming a tied customer, a tied member, as we call them, we realize the proposition is not as straight, right? Because if you're an owner and you say, well, I have this finance director, what does he do all day, right? I mean, they might as well do do all the legwork for it. That's very different to the typical SME pattern, where you have the owner or maybe the trusted lieutenant that has to, as Edward was saying, spend 30%, 48 days a year. These are the sort of numbers I'm knocking around of wasting.
It's interesting, actually, in the definitions and the research that we've done in the small business space, the far majority of small businesses are less than 5 people, or somewhere between 5 to 10 people. And very few of them have the resources and the capacity to bring in a finance director or a CFO or anyone who can hold, purely just look at the finances. So you're absolutely right. You're talking about individuals here who don't necessarily have the training to run the accounting, to run the finances, as you say, Edward, to do the tax filings. And it's a massive learning curve for small businesses. So that connectivity, making it easy, taking the pain away, is so crucial to getting it right. What do you think are the challenges getting in the way of achieving this? Phil,
you want, I can jump in. So there is this level of the dimension, as we mentioned, so small to middle-sized SMEs and their industry. So that's impossible to cover all of them. I completely agree. And I would add another one, which is the country. Without skipping the all compliance part, etc., but even an expense report in Germany, you need to fill out certain forms, and Philip knows it very well. It's a thing like this that you have only in Germany. It's unpronounceable, and you need to fill it out with what is the reason, who are the people, etc., etc. And if you don't do it, you don't get certain type of accounting treatments for tax reasons, if I remember correctly. Of course, you don't have that in Italy, and it will not be the same form. So if you want to really get into the details of that and making it simple inside the app, you upload the receipt, you take a picture, but then you also add these small things, and they are exportable in the workflows so that it gets linked to your tax accountant. That's a huge effort. And as we are also all trying to, of course, be very digital and scalable in other countries, but we see this as something where sometimes you need to decide, okay, do I want to double down a bit on Germany these next 3 months or 6 months? So the classic product roadmaps, that conversation with the team, or we do some more international expansion. You always try to do things that can be leveraged everywhere, but in business banking, it's very challenging. So I would say that. And another one on these approach in business banking, which is not just banking, it's a bit of everything, admin. We have seen this week in the US, Shopify which has a very specific workflow and with their clients on their side, and they see a lot of invoices and maybe certain clients that really run only on them, they just launched a business account. So while we are approaching it from other points of view, but there are now others that are jumping in. You have SumUp in the UK, they have some sort of business account as well. So just to say exactly, those were it's a POS or a point of sale or online payment service provider, which is getting into this area. And it's quite fascinating. And I guess also the others have seen that. And it's a kind of a competition as well for us.
I think so. I may come back to that in our final question, because I think that lends to where we see the world going, because it sounds like it could go in a number of directions, and it's anyone's bet really. But before we do that, and we don't have to have answers from everyone, but what are the challenges generally on the panel do you think that you're going to hit in the next 12 months or so? Obviously, COVID aside, that is an obvious challenge we're all having to deal with. But outside of that, what challenges are you having in your startup growth in this particular market with the challenge you've taken on?
I think I would just add to what Matteo said, because also focusing on the German market and seeing local market specificities, that's definitely something we see. So SMEs in different countries, and we're in different markets, operating in different markets, they face different challenges locally. So obviously that's something we focus on heavily. We're trying to adapt our product to the local market needs. But then a second thing I'm seeing is definitely this need for, let's say, the basic or the core banking products that we experienced definitely in this current crisis, where obviously the German government was choosing the KfW as an institution, and accredited banks could then lend out money to the local businesses, and we're not an accredited bank in Germany by the KfW. So you see that creates friction points, and also a question of should we provide everything, or should we then have part of the solution and be kind of like a secondary account to a primary account, which is run by, let's say, a traditional bank. But then it is kind of going directly against what we were saying before, that we want to save time and money, because if you need a second, third, fourth account, then obviously you will spend more money, maybe even more time on those different solutions. And so this is something around the challenges that we are seeing, I would say.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Oliver, Edward, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, let me jump in. So I think they are interesting topics. So I think the multi-country dimension is definitely one that shouldn't be taken lightly. And I think this is again where a lot of, to me, these say to VC investors when they come in, as I said, I have a couple of questions that just to sort of understand whether they understand the complexity of it. And one of them actually is, what do you think of internationalization, right? Because it's very different if you're in consumer or even a simple product vertical towards, to the horizontal play in a very diverse market. And that's why, for example, Tide, I could say at some stage we will internationalize, but ours will not be a strategy of many flags on the map, at least not initially, because of the the complexities that Matteo and Philip have outlined. I think that's one. The other challenge I want to pick up that I do see with Philip, although in UK it is better than I think in most markets, is that the entire regulatory, or let's say political mindset, is being very much bank-centric. And we clearly have new business models that make it very different. I mean, Tide, by the way, was accredited as the first non-bank to BBLS, the bounce back loans. So we were, I think, player number, if you consolidate the big banks as one, because they have many different brands, I think we're number 12 or so in the first non-bank. And I think that sort of shows that the UK government is actually very open to non-traditional competition, very conscious about that. So when we look, actually, we recognize that various markets are different, and we definitely don't want to become a traditional bank, right? So, I mean, maybe arrogantly put, if we wanted to be a bank, we would have a banking license by now. We just don't want to be because we think it's not the way to solve the problem. And then I think
So I was going to say it's an interesting phenomenon that the banking license in many ways constricts you to behaving like a bank and creating a framework, an organizational structure, a business model that is banking centric rather than, as you've all described in your propositions, human centric and member centric.
Yeah. So for our point of view, and it would be interesting because here I think we do have players, in particular Quanto, taking a different route. It would be interesting to, and there probably is no right answer, I should also say. Now, our thinking about this is we come from a resource scarcity point of view, right? So we say, we have, and I know you partner with them as well, we have ClearBank, they are banking as a service provider, like the Solaris of the UK. And we say like this back end doing the deep end ledger accounting, and so on. We don't think we as Tide need to differentiate in that area. It's really about the access layer and how to interact with the account. And so we took a conscious decision really from a resource scarcity and focus point of view not to do it, which is very, very hard because as Philip was saying, so I could tell you every time I'm in the UK with any government official or any parliamentarian say, so Oliver, when will you apply for the banking license? They never. Right? I say, why? But you're big enough, right? I said, no. So for them, it's a logical, in their mind, it's still a logical progression. There's a small fintech, once you become of age, you become a banking license. And at some stage, you will look like the big banks. And we are saying this is actually the wrong thinking, right? We want to be a platform. We want to really, do our part in that ecosystem. We do recognize there are different business models out there that will work, but we will stay relentlessly focused with the resources that we have. On building the platform rather than getting ourselves distracted, which, we are very worried about, if we went down the route of getting a banking.
So as a non-bank, what are you to your members? How do you describe yourself to your members? If your intention isn't to be a bank, what are you?
So exactly. So we are really, we call ourselves to members because we have the same thing as Matteo says, right? I would love to say to them, we have your financial operating system, right? Which is how we explain it internally. So internally, because half the company engineers, we basically say, we never touch anything that a member would consider the application layer. So we don't tell a marketeer how to be a better marketing agency or a restaurateur how to be a better restaurant with zero expertise in it. But we want to be the go-to place when it comes to all finance and admin. That's why internally we have a good word for it, financial operating system. The problem is no SME understands, right? And therefore, as a short term, we do say, we offer a smart business current account. We use business bank, we say Tide business banking and things like that, within the regulatory constraints. But we do this as a short form because otherwise it's just, I think who talked about a new category emerging? I think Edward, it was you. I think that we are creating a new category, which is just understood by SMEs just yet, right? Which is the sort of, finance admin provider layer. And that's what we use short form business bank. But that's what people do. So most of our customers, members are using Tide as their primary account. We try to then capture within the platform all their admin, finance and admin services. Sometimes we're integrating third-party softwares. And by the way, just to make it even more complicated, we've announced this within probably 24 months, also allow people to run third-party bank accounts to the Tide platform. Because
interesting.
For us, the current account is just one of the products a customer needs in, to do their banking and admin. And for us, it's really around solving it across the platform rather than in sort of what we consider sort of more traditional bank thinking of how many current accounts have I got, right? Or how big is my lending? We come from it less from a product-centric point of view. We come at more from what we call a member-centric point of view. So we're a horizontal mindset rather than a vertical product.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm going to move to the final question, and I love what you just said there, Oliver, about the financial operating system. I think there's a new acronym there, a new buzzword that we can add to the conferences in the future. But let's take that. And I noticed you all nodding to that concept of being the operating system, which I really love. But let's again fast forward beyond the COVID pandemic and look sort of 5 years out. How do you see the future looking? Do you see there being a situation where there's the equivalent of two big players like iOS and Android of banking? Or do you see lots of smaller, more artisan banks and fintechs appearing to provide more niche services, and somehow them all being connected together like some giant banking app store?
I'm happy to jump into to start off with. So, couple of sort of outside constraints. I mean, we all, I think, some of us look younger than others, although I think quite a few have, are on the age, like myself. So we've been around the block, right? We all had our childhood at a time when there was basically one model, right? A universal banking model. And because we're in this sort of mindset, there is a sort of notion as one model, there will be one future model. And I would challenge that. Right? If you really look at every other industry, a healthy industry is made up of diversity of business models. So that, if you look at retail, apparel retail, some of them are, vertically integrated, some of them are horizontal, some of them are online, some of them are more offline. If you were more offline, you may now, after COVID, try to choose to become a little bit more online. But, there will be different propositions. And I think a healthy market is one where you have diversity of sets, right? So I think that's the one thing that we always bring across. Don't think of this thing that was. The second thesis, the second thesis that we got as a sort of a border condition is we live in a world of permanent disruption. Now, great for you, Cam, that we didn't go down the COVID route, and I think given that we've got limited time, we probably shouldn't. But we are currently seeing the biggest disruption in UK business banking in a decade, right? Happening within. Right, the competitive dynamics have completely been turned on the head. So what I'm trying to say is we actually believe there is not one future state. It will be one of permanent disruption and permanent evolution. So that's thesis number 2. 3 is about number of players, and you talked about that. So it's a really interesting one. So in the UK,
I like that.
In the UK, there was a great panel that I sat on with regulators, right? And they were a very well-known. They said, well, and XYZ, especially in the consumer context, XYZ will come in, one of the GAFAs, and they will take 80%. And the regulator turned around. By the time they have 20%, we will intervene. So I think what we have to realize, we have the services, right? This is very different to your search engine or anything like that. I mean, in the UK, the government has actually intervened with the RBS Alternative Remedy Scheme, the BCR, when people had 15% market share. So I think we, by the way, that's another big argument for internationalization. We think there is effectively a ceiling at 15 to 20% market share, not because it's hard regulatory, but at that stage, as an investor, you should discount, right? Because it just. So in the end, what we see, and then I'll open up, we see, a couple of big players around that have probably 10 to 15% market share. Some of the old universal banks, some maybe 1 or 2 new material players. Then we see actually a set of very rich niche propositions. So Matteo gave a good one. I think, let me give you another one. If Amazon comes in and does their third-party distributor lending, that's a really powerful business model. But it's for a very small niche, right? And so you will have niche propositions around that. And I think that's very good. And they probably will be much better than a Tide ever serving that niche. But they will never be able to do this at scale and probably wouldn't even want to, right? So for an Amazon to go out the retail sector would be a really big move, right, on that thing. So, we see a couple of major players, some of them old, some of them new, 10, 50% market share, and loads of niche with smaller market shares. So I hear the bell ringing, so I'll shut up and hand over.
Oliver, you're also starting the invoicing system inside your app, or did I remember correctly or not?
Yeah, so we have a concept that we call Tide Tools and Tide Connect. So for every, say, accounting, we have always a tool that's on the site. So that's, invoice, by the way, has already been done. Expenses just gone live. And then we always allow third-party systems to be integrated. And the reason for that is that some of the SMEs are very simple, so they want very simple solutions. So actually,
you provide it yourself instead of telling them go on QuickBooks.
But if you want to have a Pleo, right, for sort of highly sophisticated expense management, just knock that into it. That's how we look at simple versus complex solutions.
So we're on to our final question, which is where do you see the future going? I think that's a really interesting perspective, Oliver, about the future, because it is, as you described at the beginning, it's a very fragmented and unusual heterogeneous sector. There's so many different needs that we need to cater to. Universal banking just isn't going to cut it anymore. Feel free, Edward, Matteo, Philip, what are your thoughts on where you see the future? It doesn't have to be, again, there'll be, 15 players, but how do you see it playing out? And there's no right answer to this. This is just our gut feeling on where we think it's going.
I think I really like what was just said about the future and potentially seeing how this will evolve. I think I might add, or my perspective on this is a little bit, within Europe, we have about 6,000 banks. So, and many of those banks you could consider a unicorn, having a market cap of above $1 billion. And so I see only a few very successful challenger banks to that. And even if we wouldn't consider ourselves banks, which I think I really like, and I also see similarly to the other panelists. I would still say that when you look at that current setup and the European banking landscape, we're still, I feel we are shaking this up and we're disrupting, but we're still at the beginning. So I would see a lot more players emerge and entering even the German market in the upcoming years for SME banking, and for Konto, we were one of those players, and we're seeing more and more coming. And then it really depends on, I think, who can solve that problem best, and then you have the different niche value propositions that Oliver mentioned that I also see.
Interesting. Matteo, Edward?
I would agree with Oliver. Yeah, I would agree with Oliver, and just adding or building on this. I think that open banking, as a practice, would open up a lot of opportunities of new usage of data, potentially. Embedded finance, when actually financial functions would be part of retail offering, or this checkouts, etc., but also further disintegration of banking, or traditionally banking products, like compliance, KYC offered to third parties, processing, payments, etc. They all kind of the landscape is going to be tremendously different in 5 years. And the concept of, is it going to be one player versus multiple players, it will change. I mean, it's not just challenger banks or neobanks versus traditional banks, but it's also non-financial companies using more of the financial services embedded into their services, but also some services which are used by both financial and non-financial services, which are traditionally were supplied or offered by banks. So the landscape is going to be tremendously different, and that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And I think that the opportunity side of things is in new kind of partnerships, which would potentially emerge, because it's a huge market, and somebody would be serving certain geographies or segments or particular product sets better than the others. And I think that there's tremendous opportunity for new kind of partnerships in the future, which may not be.
Do you see, for example, you partnering with each other? Might that be something in the future where fintechs start to work more closely with each other rather than competing?
Maybe, but I think that there's, I mean, there are things which are not obvious right now. I wouldn't say, I mean, I think that the speed is increasing, and something which is not quite obvious as now would emerge. And I think that this is the biggest opportunity, which we just don't see yet, but we see that, I think, coming. That's my humble perspective on things.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. We've got a few minutes, Matteo. I'd love to get your view on this, and then we can. Perfect.
I'll be very quick. I completely agree with everyone. Personalization, just to maybe stress more that point. So, especially how we have developed Penta, how it's also tied Konto and all the others. we are also very good in the selling part. So we are creating services that the customers value, and we need to make a good money out of it. And that's the difference in between, like certain companies will be more and more in volumes, like the banking as a service. I see them like probably consolidating there because it's much more volumes, like processing power. But then there will be others like these fintechs, platform, non-fintechs, everyone else that own the customer at the end. And it can be a niche, can be the 10, 15% at market share cap, but they also found a way to be profitable. And that's my overall, that's the overall aim of us as well, like really creating something that becomes profitable in a few years' time, right? So that we are sustainable also from that point of view, which is the big shift, essentially what happened the season that we had in 2019. WeWork is the emblem, but now everyone is going in that direction. So not just growth, internationalization. Yeah. Let's go to Mars. Let's do fewer things, but let's go through the entire income.
Do them well. Absolutely. I love that. I think that's a great note to end it on, actually, which is there's a lot to be done, but let's do it in a focused and sustainable way and learn from the lessons of the past. On that note, I genuinely thank you for being part of this panel, and I wish you all, Philip, Matteo, Edouard, Oliver, huge success in your personal ventures. Thank you very much for the viewers. We didn't have a Q&A session, or we don't have a question and answer process here, but we're all on the usual social channels. You can find us there, so feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
And of course, thank you, Renee, and thank you to the organizers as well. Take care.
It's been a pleasure. Bye.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Bye.
It's been a pleasure.